Where's Fielder? He's gone to the dogs.
Welcome, friends, to the Gone to the Dogs podcast. Our episode today will be a little different than normal. I've chosen, as a means of a test, looking toward the possibility of doing Audible books, I've chosen to read an essay, number 5 out of 23 essays, in my book, Gone to the Dogs, A Coon Hunter's Journey. The entirety of this podcast will be my reading of a chapter or an essay titled Time Travel. Recently, I engaged in some time travel. I didn't jump forward 800,000 years in H.G. Wells' time machine or strap myself into a DeLorean with Christopher Lloyd and Michael J. Fox for a trip back to my future. Mine was a journey back in time as I took a trip to the settings of the cherished hunting and fishing tales that have remained as alive and vibrant in my memory as in the days I first read them 60 years ago. It was a wonderful trip that left me with one regret. Why didn't I do this years ago? I'll explain. I was 6 years old when my father, a pipe fitter that traveled the eastern part of the country building power and chemical plants along the major waterways, found himself working in the town the atom bomb built, diffusion process. He would work at 3 separate such plants, Paducah, Kentucky, Portsmouth, Ohio, and at Oak Ridge. His exposure to asbestos and radiation in those plants would later shorten his life, but that's not the object of my letter to you this month. From my earliest memory, books have been my treasures. I learned to read at an early age and have never lost my love for turning the printed page. I recall reading every word on the cereal box at the breakfast table. When Dad returned to our home in West Virginia, he brought with him a book that I immediately devoured. I've read this book more times than Muhammad Ali has his Koran. I sat beside Ali one time on a flight from Kalamazoo to Memphis, and he borrowed my pen to underline passages in his Book of Islam. But I digress. The book, 20 Years Hunting and Fishing in the Great Smoky Mountains, was written by self-proclaimed perfect hunter and fisherman Samuel J. Hunnicutt and published by Byron's Printers and Publishers in Maryville, Tennessee. Originally printed in 1926, the copy my dad bought and passed on to me was a 1951 edition. My good friend Bob Plott devoted a portion of one of his books, A History of Hunting in the Great Smoky Mountains, to Sam Hunnicutt. Critics, Plott included, point out the lack of literary prowess in Hunnicutt's telling of his exploits, but Plott freely concedes Sam provides a clear snapshot of a bygone era and golden age hunters, the likes of which we'll never see again. Keep in mind, at this time in my life, I'm living in the heart of coal mining country in southern West Virginia. I'm by now accompanying my dad on limited hunts in that rugged country where game, especially coons and bears, was extremely scarce. In fact, it would be years before black bears began to inhabit the worked-out strip mines in our part of the state, where they are now plentiful. Coons were nearly as scarce. I've written before about my dad's instructions to stamp out any coon tracks we would find along the creeks as we were hunting or trout fishing. Although those species were rare in our neck of the woods, they were the game animals for which we hunted. And so, Hunnicutt's tales of camp hunting deep, Nolan, Forney, and Hazel Creeks in western North Carolina, although appearing in less than flamboyant prose, spoke to me more clearly than Ted Trueblood's or Jack O'Connor's acclaimed tales of hunting dangerous game on the African continent that I read about in the slick pages of outdoor magazines. Although I had not visited the 440,000-acre national park when I read 20 Years Hunting and Fishing in the Great Smoky Mountains, through Hunnicutt's eyes I saw the park as a mystical land of lofty peaks and swift cold creeks where hounds and hunters matched wits with North America's most exciting game. The Smoky Mountains loomed very large as I compared them to our mountains at home. The highest point in West Virginia, Spruce Knob, peaks at 4,863 feet. We would in later years hunt the Cold Knob area of Greenbrier County at an elevation of 4,280 feet. Beautiful, wild, high country in its own right. The Smoky Mountain region, by contrast, boasts 16 peaks that reach or exceed 6,000 feet, with the highest point in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, Clingman's Dome, topping out at 6,643 feet, nearly 2,000 feet higher than Spruce Knob. Mounts Mitchell and Craig, also in North Carolina, but outside the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, impressively rise 6,684 feet and 6,647 feet above the sea, respectively. Another source of fascination with the Smokies for me stemmed from my dad's love for the Plott dog. As I hold Hunnicutt's book today, I see my dad's note on the inside cover page. Plott, see page 62 and 70. Later in life, I would visit, along with my son Chris, the Plott balsam marker on the Blue Ridge Parkway, erected to the memory of Amos Plott and his famous bear dogs. And I'd experienced the thrill of participation in the dedication of a historical marker near Waynesville to commemorate the Plott breed and the family that made them famous. The Great Smoky Mountain National Park and the Plott breed are eternally intertwined. But again, this is really not a story about the Plott dog or my family's involvement with the breed. Let's get back on subject. After establishing a residence in Florida last year, I began to experience a yearning for the mountains. As most readers were enduring one of the hardest winters in history up north, I enjoyed coon hunting on the big cattle ranches with my friends, the Slaughters, or kayaking for bass in the freshwater lakes and getting the hang of catching saltwater species inshore. But as the days began to warm up here, a plan to visit the creeks and mountains of Sam Hunnicutt's Carolina began to evolve. The Plott dog and I are inseparable, and perhaps more than anything, I wanted to visit the country from which my dad derived the name for our kennel that has endured for more than 50 years, Bear Pen Plotts. Situated in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, between the Nolan and Deep Creek watersheds on the North Carolina side is Bear Pen Ridge. Hunnicutt made many references to this area in his stories, and my dad adopted his kennel name from that source. Here's a quote from Hunnicutt's book. I told him to stay at camp with the dogs and I would hunt for signs of the bear. He asked where we would go to hunt for bear signs, and I told him I was going to Bear Pen Ridge. I said, all right, I'll be going, and I went up the creek until I got to the mouth of Bear Pen Branch, then up the branch on Bear Pen Ridge, and the whole ridge was worked up with bear signs. They had raked and mashed around there as though there had been 25 bears there in one gang. My brother was getting wood the same as the night before. When I got to camp, he had the end of it very near full of wood. I asked him, "What do you want with so much wood?" And he said, "It's going to snow." Then he asked, "Did you find any bear signs?" I said, "Yes, the bears have wallowed all the bushes down on Bear Pen Ridge." A quote from Hunnicutt also inspired the name of the website I operated for 10 years, plotdogs.com. Here's another Hunnicutt quote. "This hunt was made by me and Mark Cathy and others. There were 9 hunters, and we had 14 dogs. My dogs were Troop, Trail, and Lead. I also had 3 dogs of John Everett's, trying them out. Ed's dogs were Back, Troop, and Bird. Mark's dogs were Dread, Jolly, Old Wheeler, and 2 dogs belonging to Joe Morris. Their names were Rock and Dave. All these were hounds except Mark's dogs. They were plot dogs." Mother's Day provided the perfect catalyst for the trip. I would spend a few days with my 92-year-old mother in West Virginia before heading to the Smokies. I would stop to fish one of my favorite trout streams in northwestern North Carolina before heading to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And to cap off my travels, I'd revisit the farm in Middle Tennessee where my dad was raised and where I spent many glorious days hunting and fishing when I was a kid. On May 8th, I loaded the Ford with my camping equipment, the kayak, and an assortment of fishing tackle, and pointed it north to the mountains. When I returned on the 23rd of May, 2 weeks later, I had logged 2,800 miles on the odometer, each one thoroughly enjoyed. This was to be a rough-it affair of tent camping, albeit in campgrounds rather than in the numerous primitive campsites along the trails in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. Taking that angle would require backpacking into the wilderness, and better judgment persuaded me not to attempt that alone. Had I been several years younger, or perhaps had a traveling companion along, I would have preferred to have done it that way. It doesn't take long at my age when hiking in that kind of tortuous terrain to realize that the mind is still willing, but the body is growing progressively weaker. In all, I spent 4 days with my mother, 3 days each in Ashe County and Bryson City, and 3 days in Middle Tennessee. Except for the nights in the home where I was raised, the rainy night my friends Andy and Bren Green took pity on me and invited me into their beautiful home in West Jefferson, and the 3 nights I spent with my cousins Pam and Eddie Schreiber at my dad's boyhood home in Tennessee. My home was a nylon and aluminum affair that was easy on the budget and a welcome retreat after a long day in the mountains. It was the closest I came to experiencing a camp on Deep Creek, as described by Hunnicutt, but I did go to sleep each night, breathing Smoky Mountain air and listening to the murmur of a Smoky Mountain trout stream. The campfires after supper each evening were great therapy and provided hours of total relaxation. I stopped at a familiar fly shop, Watauga River Anglers, near Boone, North Carolina, on my way to the Smokies. Talking with the owner of the shop, Steve Michael, I told him about Hunnicutt's book and my mission, as we also talked fly fishing. The subject moved to famed Smoky Mountain sportsman Mark Cathy. Cathy, along with Horace Kephart, are buried in a hilltop cemetery in Bryson City, and I vowed to visit their graves while there. Kephart was the famed author of the classic Our Southern Highlanders. An outlander from Pennsylvania by way of St. Louis, Caphart came to Hazel Creek in 1904 and lived among the Smoky Mountains and their people until being killed in an automobile accident near Bryson City in April of 1931. Caphart's frank and noticeably better written accounts of life among the colorful inhabitants of this wild and beautiful land did not replace, but rather augmented my love for Hunnicutt's simple journal. Caphart definitely helped to whet to a razor edge my appetite to walk where these sportsmen walked a century or more ago. On May 16th, I rose at dawn, consumed a breakfast of scrambled eggs, hash brown potatoes, sliced tomatoes, and bacon prepared on the Coleman stove, and left the Deep Creek campground in Bryson City to seek out the storied 20 years land of Sam Hunnicutt. Since retirement, every journey from home is accompanied by some type of fish-catching device. Knowing that Smoky Mountain streams are full of wild trout, my plan for the day was to fish Nolan Creek and hike its accompanying trails. I chose to fish the lower end of Nolan, accessed by a Great Smoky Mountains National Park trail from Lakeview Drive, locally known as the Road to Nowhere. The road, a promise to the citizens of Swain County, North Carolina, whom gave the majority of their lands, public and private, to the foundations of Fontana Lake and the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, was to provide access through the mountains from Bryson City to Fontana, 30 miles to the west. Of most importance to mountain families was the access to numerous family cemeteries that the highway would provide. Environmental concerns stopped the project after only 6 miles, including a tunnel that had been completed, thus the reference to a road that went nowhere. It was not until 2010 that the U.S. Department of the Interior paid $52 million to Swain County in lieu of finishing the road. I would have chosen the upper accesses via the Nolan Divide Trail, but the 3.8-mile hike from Clingman's Dome to the Nolan Creek Trail discouraged me. Soft Florida living for the last year hadn't prepared me for that kind of workout. I chose to hike from the lower trailhead to the mouth of Nolan and fish up. Nolan is a beautiful stream, as are all the Smoky Mountain streams, although access to the water and wading swift water over slippery rocks would have suited a younger man. I recall the days when my dad could no longer enjoy trout fishing due to the inability to negotiate just such conditions. Could this be happening to me? I put that thought quickly aside. Nolan Creek was full of trout, but I found myself more occupied with what the Bible calls vain imaginations, as I dreamed the days of Sam, Mark, Horace, and multitudes of other Smoky Mountain hunters as they strained to hear the cry of the pack above the incessant roar of this very stream. I caught a few brook trout on Nolan, but mostly I enjoyed the beauty and solitude of the mountains that day. The next day I would drive to Cherokee and fish a stream called Straight Fork in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park at the advice of a hiker named Rich, whom I met on the Nolan Creek Trail. He and his elderly dad, for whom he was waiting on the trail, had camped at Campsite 64, some 4 miles upstream. He gave me a Great Smoky Mountains National Park map, and though he didn't say it, he was thinking a stream like Straight Fork would provide much easier access for a guy like me. I seem to get that a lot these days. Readers may be thinking, what's all this talk of hiking, fishing, and bear hunting tales have to do with coon hunting? I'm getting to that. Interwoven into Hunnicutt's stories are the exploits of his favorite coon hound, Old Muse. Bob Plott cites Muse's ancestry as half black and tan and half beagle. Clearly, Hunnicutt, as he was wont to do with about anything personal, believed Muse to be the best coon dog in the mountains, and if his stories of her exploits were factual, and I have no reason to believe otherwise, she truly was a wonder. Here is Hunnicutt's tale of a coon hunt planned by me and my brother, written in his signature rambling style in which the semicolon becomes his period. This habit is evident throughout the volume. We prepared for the hunt one morning and started for Round Top, which is 9 miles from home. We kept our dogs tied until we got past the Fox Range, went across the pullback trail by the Bryson place and up the creek to the Sassafras Ford. I had on boots, so I waded at the creek and carried my brother over. We had old Muse with us, and there we turned her loose, keeping my brother's dogs tied, knowing old Muse would start nothing except coons. We went up the Pole Road Creek as fast as we could, thinking we might catch a coon. When we got to the forks of Pole Road, old Muse picked up a coon track and went trailing it. My brother turned his dogs loose, and they went trailing with her. They went on out left-hand prong to the head of Pole Road, trailing very fast, and at the Pole Road we caught up with the dogs. We left our packs here and followed them, knowing this would be the way he would come back to where we intended to camp. They went across the Fork Ridge to Pole Road Creek, and down the right-hand prong they trailed, and just before they got to the forks of the creek, they treed up a large tree near where they first started trailing. This tree being hollow, me and my brother soon cut it down, and we got 2 nice coons out of the tree. It now being very near dark, we hurried back to get our packs at the left-hand prong of Pole Road. When we got back to our packs, it was dark, so I told my brother it is 3 miles to camp, and we had better stay here tonight. My brother said it was going to rain. We'd better go to camp. I told him if he would get wood, I would build us a shed that would turn rain or snow. I had noticed a lot of chestnut bark that day when we left our packs, where it had fell off the chestnut logs. I cut 2 poles and set them against a large tree, lean-to fashion, and placed small poles across them. I then made a roof with chestnut bark and set up bark at each side. This made us a good warm camp for the night. It snowed instead of rain. We built our fire up against the tree and rested well that night. After we had finished our camp and eaten supper, we skinned our coons. Next morning, there was a heavy snow on the ground. I fried some coon and we ate our breakfast. After breakfast, we made our way to Round Top Camp, and by the time we got to the camp, it was very cold. We chopped a lot of wood for our fire. We stayed in camp all day. By night, it was so cold, my brother said the coons won't travel tonight, so I decided to stay in camp. The next morning, it was very cold, and I knew coons would not come out until it got warmer. The third morning, it had cleared up and was nice and warm. We were high on the mountain, and the sun shone early where we were. I told my brother, we will go out today coon hunting. He seemed to think it useless to go, but I told him we might catch some coons. We took old Muse and his 2 young dogs and went down Pole Creek Road. Near the forks of the creek, my brother wanted to come back to camp, for he thought the coons had not traveled. But I told him it would be as near to cross Burnt Spruce Ridge and go back up Bear Creek, that the Burnt Spruce Ridge divided Bear Creek and Pole Road, and our camp was near the top of the divide. The only difference in going back to camp from there would be crossing the Burnt Spruce Ridge. We went across Burned Spruce Ridge on to Bear Creek, and by the time we got in hearing of Bear Creek, old Muse was trailing, and pretty soon my brother's dogs put in trailing with her. They went up Bear Creek, and we went on after them as fast as we could go. They trailed to the forks of Bear Creek, then left the creek going up a little branch toward Bear Pen Ridge, and there we heard the dogs running as though they were looking at the coon. I said to my brother, "Coons have been out today." Pretty soon old Muse treed at the head of Big Branch. We hurried on. I beat my brother there. The dogs had treed up a little birch tree. I looked all over the tree and could not see anything. I spoke to old Muse and said, "Are you telling me a lie?" Just then I saw a coon up on the underside of the tree, about 12 feet from the ground on a small limb. I shot it off, and the dogs ran and grabbed it. I went down and took it from the dogs. By this time, my brother had got there. Old Muse went back to the tree and began barking up the tree. I told my brother to call the dogs up the hill that there were more coons in the tree. He said, "There's one on that limb bending down the hill. Don't you see it?" By this time I saw it. I shot it off, the dogs got it, and I went down and took it from the dogs. When old Muse turned it loose, she sprang for a hemlock tree. When she reached the tree, she began barking in a hole at the foot of this tree. We built a fire over this hole, and out came another coon. This made us 3 coons, so we started for camp. I told my brother that it was good for old Muse to know where all the coons were. He said that beat anything he ever saw a dog do. By the time we got to camp, it was dark. We got wood for the night, prepared our supper, went to bed early, and got a good night's rest. The next morning, we packed our things and went home. There are 40 like stories of coon and bear hunts as well as fishing trips in Sam Hunnicutt's book. They aren't going to win any prizes for prose, and critics will turn up their noses at his style, but his stories still captivate me today as they did in 1952. I plan to return to the Smokies soon and actually go to the Bryson place, which served as base camp on Deep Creek for many of the region's hunting legends and for many of Sam's tales as well. I can't go back in time to the days when catches of 100 or more trout in a day were commonplace and bears could be killed by the dozens. Nor can I return to the days when I could walk from the break of day until full dark, leading 4 bear hounds over rough mountain terrain, as I faithfully followed my dad on the hunts of my youth. But I can travel through time in the pages of wonderful books like Sam's to live adventures the likes of which the flatland hunter has seldom seen or can reasonably conceive. I conclude with a confession. Having traveled the country over, much of it throughout the flatlands of coon country, the following admission by a Highlander that had ventured from the mountains to work in the South, found in the pages of Horace Kephart's Our Southern Highlanders, speaks for me as well. Kephart wrote, "Mountaineers everywhere are passionately attached to their homes. At the first glance they will return, and thenceforth will cling to their patrimonies, however poor these be. So, too, our men of the Appalachians." Quote, "I went down to the valley once, and I declare I nigh saltered. 'Pears like there ain't breath enough to go around, and all them people. And the water don't do a body no good, and you can't eat hearty nor sleep good o' nights. Course they pay big money down thar, but I'd heap rather catch me a big old coon for his hide. Boys, I done home for my dog Fiddler, and all the times we've had a huntin' and the trout fishing and the smell of the woods and nobody bossing and jowering at all. I'm a hillbilly, all right, and they needn't to glory their old flat lands to me." End quote. Although Sam Hunnicutt's book is out of print and extremely hard to find, should you like to read more about the dogs and the hunters of the Great Smoky Mountains, written in serious depth and style, I highly recommend Bob Plott's books. There are 4 of them, and they're available online at bob@bobplott.com. Jim Gasque's Hunting and Fishing in the Great Smokies, published in 1947, is another great book on the Great Smoky Mountain National Park region. It's published by the University of North Carolina Press, Chapel Hill. And of course, Kephardt's Our Southern Highlanders. You should be able to find it from the booksellers online. Gone to the Dogs listeners, that concludes our podcast for today. I realize that it's somewhat shorter than normal, but I wanted to use you as my guinea pigs to see if you prefer listening to these stories as I read them to actually buying a hard copy book and reading it for yourself. So I welcome your comments. I'm on Facebook at Stephen, STEPHEN .f.fielder. Also on Instagram by the same. And I'm easy to find on Facebook. So if you would please send your comments along. And next week we'll get back to a normal format of broadcasting. I thank you for your patience. I hope you enjoyed the story. Friends, to close out the podcast today, I wanted to check up with my longtime friend Fred Moran, the Redbone man, up in the hills of Pennsylvania. The following is a phone conversation already in progress with Fred Moran. Enjoy. How it's aggravating and all the above, but you seem to have found the fountain of youth up there in those Pennsylvania hills. What have you been up to?
I wished I did. Listen to this. I do, like a lot of people know, my mother used to give me heck. My wife give me heck all the time. Why do I hunt so much by myself? I like hunting by myself. I quit when I want, do what I want, and so forth. I realize you can have a fall and stuff like that, and I've hurt myself in the woods, but I do a lot of hunting by myself. One night I was out recently, maybe a month ago, and I went to the state game lands, which is only 6 miles from where I live now. There's over close to 3,000 acres to hunt in there. The public's allowed to hunt there for deer, bear, and everything else. In fact, that's where I treed the bear at on Memorial Day weekend. But anyhow, it isn't that great coon hunting. Too many guys hunt it, and they kill everything they treat. If you see 3 coon there, man, that's like winning the world out there. But I was in there one night, and I went way back. There's a cul-de-sac, and there was a Ford truck parked there, pretty new one, because it was all shiny and that, and I seen the dog box, and I didn't recognize the truck. So I pulled up to it, and the guy, he's sitting behind the wheel. He didn't have the window down, so I don't know how he could be listening for the dog. I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "Coon hunting." He says, we talked for a minute or two. I said, "Where's your dog?" He said, "That's what I'm looking for." He said, "I ain't heard him in a good while." He says, "Are you Fred Moran?" I said, "Yeah." I didn't know who he was, but he recognized me. He says, "I thought you died." I says, a lot
that was
of people,
rude.
No, that don't bother me. I says, a lot of people probably wish I did, but I'm still kicking. He's the 3rd guy in the last, say, 4 or 5 months says he thought that he heard I died. I don't know.
Oh, my goodness. Well, the buzzards are circling, Fred.
Pardon me?
The buzzards are circling.
Yeah, I guess they are. I guess they are. But I've been hunting. Patty went with me one night. I don't know what we run. It wasn't a railroad track, and it sure wasn't no coon track, I don't think. Well, maybe it was. I don't know. I took a 2-year-old I got and a pup that's 6 months old. She just brought her one black dog. Her dog opened up immediately as soon as we turned loose on the creek. Well, we've hunted that creek 100 times. It ain't, there's no woods there. Maybe trees line the creek on both sides, and it goes for maybe almost a mile. But usually I tree a coon in there. Well, the dog, the 2-year-old I'm running, is pretty tight mouth. But he didn't open it at all. And she's running like she's looking at it. I was ready to say, what's going on here? Just in my trees. Well, I'm used to that, but her dog trees also. We let them tree for maybe 3 minutes, and they're barking good. We started up to them. Next thing I know, the race is on again. I said, what's going on here? They go about another 300 yards, make a circle, and come back down the creek just like they went up it. Now, mind you, they're about 900 yards from us, but they're coming toward us. I figure I'm going to see what this is. Well, before they got there, they treed again. They did the same thing, treed for a couple minutes, treed good. Next thing we're starting to them, off to the races the third time. I said, it's got to be a bobcat. I said, that's the only thing I could figure. Well, it ran a little further, maybe a couple hundred more yards, and the tree, this time they treed like they should tree, and they stayed. We get all the way up there. Now, we run this track once before. I know at least once, maybe twice. We get up, the tree's a big tree. It's full of vines and that, but it's a tree there's no leaves on this time of year, so you should see whatever they got. But a lot of the trees, it's like an umbrella. The limbs go way out and go almost touch the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel the dogs didn't make a wide enough circle to pick it up from the main trunk of the tree. And whatever it was went out one of them limbs that jumped off, and they never picked it up. I'd give a $5 bill to know what the heck they run. I still feel it was a bobcat, but I don't know for sure. But it just funny to us. I mean, you had to be there. I mean, they were running just like they were looking at it. Now, I've run bobcat and treat them. My kid had a bobcat dog. I just put it to sleep about 6 months ago. He was 13 years old. He was a good one. And we used to hunt him every Saturday and Sunday in the wintertime, especially when the snow came on. And I seen the different things that he did, but he wasn't the greatest, but he was pretty good. I brought him down Tennessee off an old black guy. He says he tired chasing them bobcat, and he had him for a coon dog, and the dog would treat coon. And but he was a pretty good dog. He was a lot of fun, and we had him for good, at least 8-10 years. I bought him when he's only about 2 years old, and I think he was 13 when I put him to sleep. So
yeah. Well, let me ask you something and see what you
sure.
think about this. In the podcast just before this one, I was talking to Jim Meeks from down North Carolina. Jimmy Meeks. I don't know if you know Jimmy or not.
I heard of him.
Yeah, the Yadkin River guy. And we were talking about bobcats and how someone had told him that was a cat hunter that, the bobcats would tend to jump out on you at night.
Oh, yeah.
And run. But in the daytime, they'll stay up. They'll stay treed if the dogs tree them.
Usually.
Yeah. Well, I just wonder if there's any chance you could go in there in the daytime and try to strike that track and see if you could get a race out of it, and maybe you would stay up if you treat them. Just a thought.
I might take a walk here tomorrow because we're going to have snow tonight. Mm-hmm. And It's supposed to be pretty good snow, but then it's going to get warm again tomorrow and rain. So I don't
I
know,
see.
uh, but like I say, they're funny as heck. When one time I wasn't with the guys, we got. I don't know if you. I'm sure you heard of them, but I don't know if you ever saw one. We got a lot of fisher up here too.
I've only seen films of them, but I know you do have them because,
They're
yeah,
nasty. They're
yeah.
nasty. And a lot of coon hunters blame them on killing young coon. And they're
Mm,
vicious enough to do it. I know that. The game warden that used to hunt with me, he confiscated one off a guy that trapped it out of season. It was 26 pounds. I'll
wow.
tell you what, he had teeth on him like a coon dog, believe me. He
Hmm.
had big teeth on him. I was surprised. And, but
Aren't they
two
somewhat
guys,
like a mink or something of that family?
they look a lot like a mink, but they're fatter, bigger, and everything. This one
Yeah.
weighed 26 pounds that the game warden had.
Wow, that's to be a
That's a
big
big
one.
one.
Yeah.
I treed one where I used to live. Where I used to live, me and my grandson was hunting. He was about 15 at the time, and the dogs run a track. And these dogs that I had at that particular time had always been straight. I never had no trouble with it. But this track was going, oh man, it drove me crazy. I couldn't figure out what it was. I said, Dave, you go up the edge of the woods there by the field, and I'll go down below. Take a couple leashes with you. Whatever dog comes through there first, beat its ass. I said, because this ain't no coon. I said, now go down below. Well, the dogs started coming toward us. Just before they got to the field, they made a U turn and went back in the woods and treed. I couldn't believe it. So we go back and we start to the dogs, and he beats me to the tree. And, but, oh, maybe by 12, 15 yards. And he comes back to me and meets me, and he says, they got something funny up there. So I said, what the heck could be funny up there? So I go into the tree and I recognize it right away. It's a fisher. And I know he's going to jump off because he's going up one limb, coming down, going up the other limb. I told my grandson, I said, grab the dogs and tie them up. I said, I don't want them to rip it up. And I shot it out. It was a 14-pound female.
Hmm.
And I never expected to tree a fisher where I treed this. This is where I used to live, and I hunted that woods 1,000 times. I didn't even know there was fisher down there. But I talked to a trapper later, and he told me he got them on film. You know, he got trail cameras out, and he said he never caught one, but he says he's got pictures of at least 2 or 3 different ones from the size of them. You know, one's a big one, but that was the only fisher I ever got. And but I've seen them, and when we had the bobcat dog, we treat him. We had there used to be a black guy. He moved to Wisconsin. We all called him the Shadow. He used to follow me everywhere, but I was his hero. He used to call me Uncle Freddie. His name was Greg Hoskins. He had coon dogs. I met him coming out of a restaurant one time. He seen the dog box in the truck, and he says, "You, what kind of dogs you got?" I said, "Red dogs." And we hooked up ever since that. And he came hunting with me, and we became good buddies and so forth. And I didn't remember him. But when I was in the dog control business, I find him about 3 years before that, where he lived on his dogs running around. And he used to laugh about it all the time. But I find him and I didn't recognize him. But he's a good guy. He just
Yeah.
moved to Wisconsin. He lived there before, but he's got a house down here yet. He's coming back next week or week after, see his kinfolks down here, and then go back to Wisconsin. And he's got,
Good friends come in all colors, shapes,
oh
and
yeah,
sizes.
this guy's a
And
character. This guy,
yeah,
he had some good dogs. I got him a Walker dog. She was good. He won Mountain Music Hunt, which was one of the bigger hunts in Pennsylvania. He won a lot. He made her Grand Night champion. She was a good
Mm.
dog, and he don't have any dogs right now. And him and my kid owns some property, about 31 acres, down where I used to live out in the woods. And he had a pig pen built, and they went in halfers, and they were raising pigs down there. Boy,
Oh, yeah.
that was something. Them two pig farmers.
I got
But
you. Well, let me rewind the tape here just a minute. Do
uh,
you think possibly that this track that you and Patty ran the other night was a fisher?
it could. I told her later, and she agreed with me. It was one or the other. We felt a fisher
Mm-hmm.
or a bobcat,
Yeah.
and because they'll jump all over the trees too.
Well,
Bill,
and all the years of your experience, I'm sure you've seen coons jump out of trees too.
I can what?
I said, in all of your years of experience, I'm sure you've seen coons jump out
Oh
of
yeah,
trees too.
oh yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Not often, but they
No,
will.
no. Bill Mays, when he was living, he was a Walker man here. He was an old timer, and he was hunting by himself one night. He treed a fishery, he told me, and he shot it out with his pistol or rifle or whatever. And it came down. He says it whipped 3 dogs and got in the rocks, and he couldn't get it out. He got too far back in there. He said, Fred, they would have whipped 5 dogs if I had them there. They're vicious.
Yeah.
And a lot of coon hunters tell me that they'll definitely kill young coon. I know they kill squirrels. That's their main thing to go after.
Is there
And
any kind of season on them? I guess you can trap
yeah,
them.
they
Can't
got
you?
a season. It's
Yeah.
usually runs about like coon season, only a little bit shorter.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little shorter. And
Well,
but
now
they're
listen. Do you have any porcupines in your
oh
area?
yeah.
Huh?
Well, not where our coon club is, which is only 14 mile. We were having a meeting one day, and the guy looked out the window. There's a porcupine going across the yard where our coon
Wow.
club is, and that's only 14 miles from my house.
Wow.
And so I haven't never seen none right here at the house, but I've
Mm-hmm.
seen them besides the club. I've seen them about 15 mile different direction. Yeah, we don't have many down here, and I'm glad of that
Well,
because
a
they
state
could
like
be bad on a dog.
yeah, for sure. Well, a state like Pennsylvania, and you automatically think of the major cities, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and all up and down up the east side up there. But you've got a lot of wilderness and hunting territory in the state of Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania has, according to the Game Commission, has more public hunting than any other state in the nation.
That's
That's
terrific.
what they put in their pamphlets.
Yeah.
And we do have a lot. You go up north of where I live, 70, 80 mile. The farmers up there love for coon hunters to come because they grow a lot of crops up there. The coon eat them out of the house and everything else. And I usually, Randy knows all about it. He goes over there. If you want to have a heck of a hunt, it's all level. The only place it is level, and you could treat 10, 15 coon a night if you got till 1 o'clock in the morning. They got them up there.
Yeah.
Me and Timmy Bruin hunted in a pouring down rain one night till 1 o'clock in the morning. We seen, I believe it was 13 coon. That's a lot, even for Pennsylvania.
Oh, yeah, that's a lot for anywhere, for sure. It is. Well, what you got in terms of dog power these days?
I don't have no power. I'll tell you what, Steve, this has been my worst year in my lifetime. I lost $10,300 worth of dogs to cars this year.
Oh, man.
And I had about a month ago, I had a 2-year-old that I liked real well. He wasn't acting right. I took him to the vet, and they couldn't find a thing wrong with him. Well, he seemed to come around and be okay. Then he got a little sick again. I took him back to the vets. They've got about 8 vets at this place, and they're pretty good. And they checked him for everything. Couldn't find a thing wrong. Well, he got better. At least to me, he did. And I was hunting him. But I had a coon in a box trap, and I decided to take it out and turn it loose for the pup. But I figured I better take the older dog. Well, I call him old, but he's only 2. And so he can entice that pup. Well, I turned the coon loose, and the pup wasn't paying much attention, so I turned the old dog loose. The coon didn't. I should have given more lead and more time, but the coon went up a tree only about 75 yards away. But the older dog wasn't acting right. And the guy with me, I shot the coon out for the pup. It was during season. This was only maybe 2 months ago. And anyhow, the guy with me, I told him, I said, there's something wrong with that dog. He ain't acting right. I said, this must mean another trip back to the vet. I said, I'll take him tomorrow. This is around 5 o'clock. I put him in the pen, and the next morning I get up early, and I figure I'll feed them dogs right now. It's 7 in the morning. I'll feed them dogs, and I'll put the one in the truck and go up to the vet and be the first one in line. So I go up there. He's laying in the pen dead.
Oh,
now,
man.
what he died from, I have no idea. The dog was a picture of health other than that day before where he acted funny and so forth. But I don't know what he died from. I liked the dog. He had a loud mouth, and he was a tree dog.
He didn't go off. He didn't go off his feed, or was he?
No, didn't go off. He had in the past, but he didn't at that time. Didn't go off his feet or anything. And they checked him for everything just about on that one trip I went up there. Okay. I heard of a dog down in Kentucky, and I knew the boy. He came up and tried a dog for me years ago. So I knew I felt I could trust him and everything. I said, I'll tell you what. He told me what he wanted for the dog. I got him a little more closer to my price. I said, you meet me on Sunday, I'll just buy the dog. He's only 14 months old. He won over $300 some in money hunts. I figured he had to do something. So he said, I can't go, but I'll send my wife. So I met his wife at the post office in Danville, West Virginia, and paid her for the dog and bought him. Well, he had some faults, like I expected, but he was a tree dog, and he did go hunting. And that's the name of the game to me.
Right.
And I kept hunting him. Well, one night, me and Patty decided to hunt right across the road from where I live, back in the woods there. A guy gave me permission to hunt there. And last time her and I hunted there, I think we seen 4 coon in there, and we didn't kill none of them. So I thought we ought to tree one there pretty quick. Well, Patty's dog struck first. My dog got in with it. Instead of going the way I planned on, they didn't. They headed toward the road. I grabbed the pup. He was near me. I threw him in the truck. I said, come on. I said, we got to head him off at the path because they're going right toward the highway. I floored it. I guarantee I was there in 4 minutes. My dog was already laying on the side of the road. Patty's got across the road. She was on trail on track back in the other wood. And mine was there. And whoever hit him did have time to pull him to the side because he wasn't hit where I picked him up at. So he had 3 collars on him, and none of them were ruined anyhow. The tracking collar's still working. So I hated that. And I've been looking for something ever since. I bought this 2-year-old. Yeah, and he's a nice young dog, but he ain't what I'm looking for. The good ones are few and far. They always been. And I'll tell you what, the prices they're asking for dogs nowadays, you can almost buy a pretty new car for that price.
Yeah. Well, Fred,
they're ridiculous on some of these prices anymore.
Well, they certainly are. Back just a moment to that. That's the big heartbreak in coon hunting. You invest in a puppy, You don't only invest in the feed and the vet bills
Right.
and the
You don't
initial
even count
price.
that.
You invest in the time you spend with that dog, and like you say, you like this dog. We
That
do
that
like our dogs. We do
That's why
have
I
a
asked you
relationship.
about the insurance. I found my buddy's wife sells insurance down in West Virginia. She's supposed to get back to me. She should have already done it, but she hasn't yet. And I did have insurance on a dog clear back in the 60s. I bought a red dog to one Redbone day. Uh, yeah, I'll put it this way. How he won some of them hunts, I don't know, but he won quite a few hunts. But I didn't try him. That was my dumbness. And I bought the dog, and I paid a good price for him back in the 60s. And I thought I'm going to get him insured because I ain't going to have something happen to him. And well, so I got it from Aetna at that time, but I don't even think they're in business now. I didn't put them out of business, but they went out of business. At least I think they did. But so I'm determined the next dog I have here, it's going to be insured. I guarantee you that.
Well,
I
maybe
ain't
our
going.
listeners here can help us out, Fred, because I know when you asked me if I knew someone, company that was insuring dogs, and the only thing I could think of was the company that used to write liability insurance for the coon clubs around the country, and that was
Uh-huh.
a organization called Sportsman's Insurance in New York State. But if you're listening out there to this podcast and you have information that you could direct fellow listeners to concerning companies, insurance companies that will insure dogs, contact us. Send me
Yeah, I
a
would like to
message
know
on
because
Facebook.
I ain't the only person in this boat. There's a lot of them.
Oh, absolutely, there is for sure. Well, that's the big heartbreak in coon hunting when you do invest of your time and you really put your heart into it, literally, and
I
then you
bet you
have something like that happen. It really does set us back.
I bet you the first 40 years of my life, I never had a dog yet. And all of a sudden, I get two and three a year. I
Mm,
lost three this year to cars.
right,
Yeah.
right.
And,
Well,
and two of them I would have kept for a good while unless somebody got crazy.
Well, I
So,
often say when I'm out and about here in Florida and I see the amount of traffic. When I first came down here in the 60s in Central Florida, it was orange groves and ranches, and now it's wall-to-wall traffic anywhere you go. And I say, where are all these people going? What have they got to do? And, of course, I'm out there among them, too, so I guess, but I'd say it's an increase in traffic. Maybe people are working at different times of the day, or I don't know what the reason, but it's I've had dogs killed by cars, not very many, but I have over the years, and I've had friends that have had them, and it's just a heartbreaker. It really is.
well, like I say, and it's always a good one. It gets if
Oh
the
yeah,
dog was no good, you could put him out on a turnpike and they'd bypass him.
that's for sure. The old saying,
But
"Go play in the traffic," right?
yeah, but
Well,
I'll get another one. Like I say, two of my buddies are going down to the Winter Classic, and they're going to
mm,
check out one for me on the
yeah.
way down. And so they'll let me know what he does down there, and maybe they'll find a diamond in the rough. You never know.
Well, in days gone by, the South was always redbone country, or at least that's where you found a lot of dogs. Although there were also a lot of good red dogs out in Missouri and out that way in Iowa, through there, I recall from my days. But do you think they're regional that way, or do you find them kind of spread out all over?
I always felt Kentucky and Tennessee was redbone country.
I see. Yeah.
I had good luck on dog and Oklahoma. I used to do real good there, but
Mm,
them guys got smart on me and they found out what them dogs really. They didn't read Phil Cryer, Merrick Cooner, and they found out what dogs are bringing, and the prices changed for me anyhow.
Well, those
And
were probably descendants of Old Dan and Little Ann,
yeah,
from
probably. I'll never forget. Listen to this fast story. I was out in Missouri looking at a dog. He didn't pan out, but I had a friend that lived out there. He's dead now. He said, "You want to go to a fur show?" I said, "Where at?" He says, "About 50 miles from here, over in Oklahoma." I said, "We ain't doing nothing else. Might as well." So we go over to this first show. I seen, and they had everything at this first show. Wolverines, which I never saw one before. And they had Wolverine hides there and polar bear hides, everything. There were people there from Alaska, everywhere came to this first. It was a big one. And I went to this one guy. He was buying hides there. And I says, "Who sells you the most coon?" I was determined to buy a dog while I was out there. I didn't care what color. I figured they'll pay for the trip if I buy a good one. I went up to him and I says, "Who has some sells you the most coon hides?" He says, "My boys do." I says, "What kind of dogs your boys have?" "Red dogs." Oh man, I'll tell you what, I thought I meant to poke bear for a minute when he says red dog. I says, "Give me their phone number. Let me so I can call them." I called the guy and I went down there. He told me how to get to his house. And I went down there and he had a female that he priced to me for $500. And he says he described her and everything. They owned a ranch, 1,000-acre ranch. What he didn't own, his dad owned. And if his dad didn't own it, his brother owned it. So they had 3,000 acres to hunt on. And at least that's what they told me, and I believe it. So anyhow, I seen a male dog laying in the yard over the other end. These guys never tie their dogs. The dogs train themselves just running loose, treeing squirrel, coon, and everything. Now, there's two parts of this story where you hear the second part. But anyhow, I says, "What about that male dog? What do you want for him?" "Oh, I wouldn't sell him." I said, "Well, give me a price anyhow." He says, "I'd have to have at least 500 for him too." I said, "Well, I'll be back at dark and we'll go hunting." Okay. He says, "You be here." I get back at dark and he's all ready for me. I says, "What's the fault with these dogs?" I said, "They all got faults." He says, "Well, they'll both bother armadillo." Well, that ain't going to bother me in Pennsylvania. I ain't never seen an armadillo dig the concrete up or anything. So we go hunting, and the first thing the dogs do, they bayed about 200 yards ahead of us when we turned them loose. I go out there, and they got a big armadillo bayed up. I said, "You got a sack or anything?" He says, "One in the back of the truck." I went back to the truck and got that sack and caught that armadillo and put it in the sack and put it in the back of his truck. I took it home and gave it to my veterinarian. He had it for about 6 months in his office, and he used to feed it cat food, he told me. And it up and died. But it was a big one I thought it was, about 15 pounds. And anyhow, we went on, we treed a coon, but it was a den tree. He says, "I'll bet you don't think there's a coon in that tree." I said, "No, I didn't say nothing. There's probably one in there." He said, "Nah, I could tell you don't think there's a coon in that tree." He says, "Give me 10 minutes, I'll be back." He ran down to the truck, got an axe out of the truck, cut the tree down, got the coon out. I said, "You didn't have to do that. I put the tree in the pocket." I just reached in my pocket and I says, "I think I'll take take them dogs." And I hand him the money. He says, he looked at the money. He said, "You're going to take both them dogs?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "I think they'll work okay." They were good dogs. I don't mean to brag, but I sold the female for more than I paid for both of them. And the male I kept for myself. I won a lot of big hunts with him. I sold him when he was 7 years old for $1,750. And he was a heck of a dog. I liked him. Well, I went out there one time. Somebody traded a four-wheeler in on a dog to me. They didn't have all the money. I have no use for a four-wheeler. I'll kill myself on one. I had it sitting here probably 6 months. So I called this guy out in Oklahoma, the same guy I got the two from. I said, Danny, I says, you have any use for a four-wheeler? He says, well, how good is it? I said, oh, it's an A1 shape. I said, what you got in a Red Dog? And he told me. And I said, I'll trade you that four-wheeler, even up for it, and bring it out there. He said, bring it on out. We'll do some business. So anyhow, like you're saying now, the couple of years went by from the first two dogs, and I bought a dog or two in between from. But he got smarter on the price, or else I would have probably gotten it for $500 or $600. But I'm trading a four-wheeler in that was worth at least $2,000. Well, I get there around 11 in the morning, and he says, I said, where's the dog at? He says, jump in the truck. We rode to different hilltops and listened for the dog treeing somewhere. He says he's treed somewhere. He's got a cat or coon or squirrel or something. All his dogs are like that. They're hunting all the time. And anyhow, we looked till 2 o'clock. Never heard the dog nowhere. We went back to the house. He said, well, you're going to have to I said, I wanted to get on home. He took the four-wheeler for a ride. He was satisfied with it. He says, well, you're going to have to stay here to 4:20. I said, what's 4:20? A high school band coming out to play or what? He said, no, the dog will be here. He knows it's child time at 4:20. This is God's truth. I told this story 8,000 times. 4:20, here comes that dog, lobbing up the road just like he was his last meal. I grabbed him. I said, I'll get him a hamburger along the way. And I just threw him in the truck, took his collar off, put mine on, and headed to Pennsylvania. But I'll never forget that, 4:20. That okay. I sold him to a guy in West Virginia. He was a good dog. He didn't suit me, but he was a good dog. And I sold him. He kept him till he died. He loved the dog, and he was a nice dog.
Well,
and,
Fred, that's a great story, and 420. Is that what you named him?
No, I forget what I called him. I kept the name whatever he had. I don't remember now, but I'll never forget that how that dog knew that time. He was so used to it. But I could imagine any dog could get trained that well if you feed them all the time at 8 in the morning. They expect it at 8 in the morning.
Well, speaking of time, we have been at it here for a little over a half hour, and we're adding on here to a podcast that I did about my book, Gone to the Dogs, A Coon Hunter's Journey. So we're going to have to wrap it up for today, Fred, but man, it's good to hear.
Well, it's good hearing from you. I ain't heard from you in a long time.
Well, it's been too long,
I thought maybe your wife didn't allow you out or something.
Well, we won't go there.
Okay.
Okay. Fred Moran, the Redbone man from the hills of Pennsylvania. Man, it's good to talk to you again. And hey,
thanks for calling, Steve.
I'll be calling soon. You take care, buddy.
All right, buddy. We'll see you.
Bye. Okay, folks, that is a wrap for this week on the Gone to the Dogs podcast. If anybody asks you where's Steve Fielder, tell him he's over there in the hills of Pennsylvania trying to catch up old 420 with Fred Moran. He's gone to the dogs.